Good afternoon. Welcome to the celebration of the life of Charles William Ricketts, who we lovingly knew as Chuck. Thank you so much for gathering together to remember and celebrate Chuck's life. I'm the Reverend Mary Geer, minister for the Olympia Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm joined today by Troy Fisher, OUUC's music director. Thank you so much to all who helped create and support this sacred space today. We are streaming and recording the service today. We are grateful for the gift of your presence in whatever way you have arrived. We gather here today to grieve the loss of Chuck Ricketts, a partner, a friend, a father, a model railroader, a creator of beauty and art. Chuck shared his love of trains and the theater with so many people and so touched the lives of many throughout his own life. Today, may we be grateful for the art and the friendships that he cultivated and that he leaves behind. Chuck died in an accident after suffering for some time with numerous health challenges. He was adventurous and creative until the very end. We mourn Chuck in a time of so much grief. In this time, may we remember that love never dies, but it lives on in us. It is the practice of this community to light a chalice when we gather, a symbol of our faith tradition. Today we light our chalice with these words from the Reverend Greg Ward. If we are lucky, we all get the chance during our life to know someone who becomes for us an exemplar of living. And if we are really lucky, we will recognize how they ended up passing on some of their goodness to us. But one thing is certain, no one, not one of us, entering this world can escape the cost of living. The price we pay is this: to live in this world, we must accept that someday we will have to die. To love what is alive, we must accept having to lose what we've made precious through our care. To be fully and fiercely human, we must accept having to be breakable and sometimes broken. When we stop to notice how Chuck's life gave us a path and a little light to see by, it encourages us to help carry that light forward. Though each of us carries forth in this world a small flame, we know that the ability of that light to brighten the world depends on the many others who learn to move with it in their hearts. We light this chalice today to honor the life and living of a truly bright light, Chuck Ricketts. Chuck Ricketts was a lover of beauty and creativity. Charles William Ricketts was a Christmas baby, born on December 25th, 1935, in Virginia. He was an only child and says he was very close to his father, who Chuck described as a meat cutter. Some of us would call that a butcher. Chuck maintained a close relationship with his father for the entire duration of his dad's long, good life. Chuck's career was as a university professor, teaching theater and drama. He did many things. He was a designer, an actor, and occasional director, as well as an instructor. And when Chuck spoke of the theater, there was a spark in his eyes that revealed his love of drama and all things theatrical. Chuck loved music, and he joined many critics and musicologists in thinking that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was the best piece of music ever written. The Ninth was Beethoven's last complete symphony, an epic piece that made history because it was the first time a composer incorporated solo and choral voices into a symphony, which had been only instrumental up until then. And I can well imagine Chuck appreciating the innovation and beauty of this majestic and historical piece. It was the love of and a career in theater that brought Chuck and Janet Spencer together in 2017. They found each other on Match.com because of their theatrical backgrounds. The internet is good for some things. Janet says they were both looking for someone to love and to be a companion, and they clicked right away. Janet introduced Chuck to Unitarian Universalism, and he liked OUUC so much that he joined the congregation in 2019. He was a regular participant in small groups and adult education classes. Chuck's passion for life was for model railroads, a hobby where he channeled his creativity and art. And Janet says Chuck would tell the story of getting his first model train when he was just 1 year old. He built many scenes throughout his life, which he would then dismantle and give the pieces away. He was designing a model railroad scene and had all the pieces in the garage ready for him when he died. Chuck was a master model railroader, known by model railroaders for 100 miles around. And his railroading friends honored Chuck with an online gathering on September 15th. His creations were incredibly detailed, epic, and beautiful. And Janet says she received many condolences from people around the country who respected Chuck so much and will miss his guidance and his expertise. Chuck was married several times and widowed twice. He has a daughter who lives in Colorado. Chuck lived with health challenges, doing the best he could to remain active and vital. He died on August 7th at the age of 87 after a traumatic fall that took his life. Chuck lived a life of beauty and art. He loved life. He loved his friends. He loved Janet, and he loved trains. He leaves a legacy of beauty and creativity, and we are all grateful. I imagine that Chuck's heaven would have epic music, creative theater, and lots of model railroad trains. Chuck, may your spirit be at peace in such a place.
Hello, everybody. I'm Janet Spencer. I use she, her. I don't know anything about model railroading. I can't tell HO scale from a fish scale. But I fell in love with Chuck when he showed me the fabulous layout he designed and built as his house in Lacey. It was called the SS&S for Sherwood, Shelton, and Sarrazin. Sarrazin was the street that he lived on. It took up the whole basement of that house, 3 rooms. Chuck had been a theatrical set designer, and he painted the background of this layout as northwestern scenery. Mountains, everything. There were little buildings and tiny people and tongue-in-cheek humor throughout. Pandora's Box Factory appealed to me, and of course, I understand that there was the reason that there was a cat on the tin roof of Big Daddy's warehouse. There was a barrel factory called James Fenimore Cooper. And if you peeked in to the hotel window, you could spy on a couple in bed. Our time together was far too short, but it was packed with sharing and traveling and cooking and eating. Chuck got to meet my family, and I met his. We told each other all about our lives before we met. We were incredibly open to each other about all the good and the bad times we had lived through. And we never judged each other, and that was special. I was going to write more, but then I found something Chuck had written a couple of years ago, so I'm going to read that instead. He said, "Good morning, I'm Chuck Ricketts, and I'm 83 and a half, going on 84. I fondly remember as a child when adults asked, 'Charles, how old are you?' I said, 5 and a half, going on 6. I'm glad to be 83 and a half because, unfortunately, a number of my friends, colleagues, and even some former students didn't make it this far. When I was young, I had a fear of heights, so I refused to go up to a restaurant on the 50th floor. Then I encountered Zen and existentialism, and I realized I could choose not to step off the top of a building. That ended my fear of heights. I also realized there were other things that I could make choices about. So I chose to be a happy person rather than a victim. Since that time, I've encountered a number of ups and downs. In 1992, my wife and I sold our home and moved into a large motorhome. We planned to spend the rest of our lives traveling. Just as we were getting ready to leave, we discovered she had breast cancer. After her surgery, we traveled merrily around the U.S., made friends, and saw much to enjoy and broaden our perspective. We traveled full-time, almost 5 years, and then learned she had lung cancer. She passed away in 1997 at the age of 57. I was heartbroken and went through all the periods of grief, but still remained basically a happy person. In 2000, I remarried, and in 2007, we moved here. My wife had arthritis, and it grew so bad that I could no longer care for her. She went into a nursing home and passed away in 2013. My hobby of model railroading helped me to endure. That can be confirmed by a fellow model railroader, known to all of you, Don Melnick, and his wife Rosalie, members of this congregation. Just over 2 years ago, I suffered a stroke and lost the use of my entire right side. I couldn't walk, and my right arm hung like a heavy weight from my shoulder. I worked very hard at therapy for almost a year to regain the use of my arm and hand and be able to walk again. Throughout that ordeal, I remained happy and made it a point to laugh every day. As you can see, I can walk and use my arm now. I can't run a marathon or use chopsticks yet. Last fall, a wonderful lady and I found each other on the internet. She is now my sweetheart, and I will continue to love her more and more each day for the rest of my life. You all know her as Janet Spencer, and I'm still a very happy guy.
There are many stories and memories of Chuck with us today. We make time to hear some of them now. For those online, I invite anyone who wishes to share a quality or a brief memory about Chuck. You can write that in the chat, and we'll be sure to share it with Janet and her family. For those who are here on site, if you have a story that must be told, I'll invite you to share it in just a moment. And remember, there will be more time for sharing after the service at the reception. Jim, would you like to begin?
For those of you who don't know, I am Jim Elder, and I first came across Chuck Ricketts in about 2007 when I had sold my house in the mountains to the west of here, and he had moved in from Arizona. And turns out because of his love of model railroading, he sorted out where the nearest groups of people were, and he discovered the club that I've been a member of for some time, which is at the fairgrounds. If you ever attend the Thurston County Fairgrounds, we're one of the nicer exhibits, I think. And we became acquainted, and with just maybe a week or so later that we started discussing where we lived, and it turned out that I was just a fair way across the fairway from him at the Capital City Golf Course, which really turned out to be a plus, as it turned out, because he had a ready-made subcontractor to come over and help him, which he did. And in about 2 years' time, he had his concept that he'd already put together before he ever arrived in the Northwest in the house that he specifically bought because it had a large basement, which apparently was a problem to find up here. And some of my fellow model railroad friends, I introduced them to Chuck, and so he had a nice crew to help him out. Within 2 years' time, we had the major concept in place and operational. And we were ready for what was called a social event. Only in the parlance of the model railroaders, we call it an operating session. And for the next 8 years, we did just that. And of course, we added to the railroad as we went along. And if you look at the book in the lobby, you'll see how it looked when it was offered to the magazine. And those operating sessions usually had 8 to 12 people at our layout. And it was a lot of fun. And we attempted to operate the railroads similar to a real railroad, but a lot of it was just a social event and discuss what we like to do about the hobby and what we were going to do next. Well, anyway, the SS&S was also part of one of the Northwest model railroader narrow gauge conventions. I forgot the exact date it was, 2015 or 16, something like that. But during that event, we had people from Germany and Japan, and over 150 people came through that model exhibit within 4 days. It was a busy 4 days. And as it turned out, I met a Japanese man and his older grandfather, and who didn't speak much English, but I gave them an opportunity to run the railroad. And about 2 months later, I got a Japanese magazine back describing some pictures of Chuck's layout. So he's in a Japanese magazine too. Well, Glenda, who was his wife when he arrived here, she came up here because her health, she knew, was degrading, and she wanted to be up here by her family. And like I said, Chuck agreed to come up here for that reason, as long as he could find that basement house, which they did. And but she eventually passed away in that 8-year period after our initial operations of the railroad, and which relieved him, I guess, of many caretaking duties. So trips by train, plane, and auto to Arizona, Southern California, and elsewhere in the country were on order, where we could attend many events involving model railroad. Trips to Pasadena, Phoenix, Denver, and one to Virginia with some of his friends that he had in Arizona. We met in Virginia to see the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad Museum complex. Plus, we did some history work too. We went to Williamsburg, Virginia, which is really an interesting place. I would recommend it to everybody. And as it turned out, it was not too far from his childhood home. And he pointed out a few things to us that look much different now than it did in, 1939 or so, yeah. But as already mentioned, Chuck had a little bit of bad luck with some pneumonia that he had, and it affected his balance, and he had to spend some rehab time in the hospital and over at Panorama Rehab Center. And during that time, I took care of the house by the golf course and washed and delivered clothes as he needed to. And during one of our meetings, he spoke of his life that he had as a youngster when he was only his father and his mother and no siblings at all. And he shared with me a sentiment that I really cherish. And he said, I would like to consider you my younger brother. Now it is 2018, and I guess it's 17 by your recollection, Janet, that Chuck and Janet are companions together and busy traveling. The one I remember was the one to the Gulf of California. You're taking a small boat cruise, and he was telling me that he really enjoyed the cruise, and he needed to get in the water once, but he said really enjoyed laying on the lounge on the deck and having a mint julep or something better. But observing, as he does, you know, the landscaping and the coloration of things, he was already creating his next model railroad that I didn't know was going to exist at all. But as it turned out, he wanted to move over close to Janet. When she lived in Tumwater near Bell Street. And apparently a realtor had one right next door. They have a common backyard fence and just put a gate in and they can join one another's company. And so he sold his house on Saracen Street, surprising enough, with the model railroad intact. That usually doesn't happen. And which made it a lot easier on Chuck and me and the people that help him that we didn't have to take it apart, and we know it's there and still doing what it's supposed to do, hopefully. We haven't heard much about it since then. But anyway, he had his plan in mind when he moved into his house near Janet, and he filled it up with a model railroad. He filled it up, the garage, with a model railroad that he had thought about while he was in the Gulf of California. And he called that the Baja Sienna. Now, when you think of Sienna, think of colorations, lots of reds and earthy colors and whatnot. So we built the whole railroad in that type of motif. And he had in mind of doing it as low cost as possible. So he wrote a number of articles during the construction of this, and they were all published for the model railroaders, and how he progressed with his work. And the only thing that surprised me was some of the foam that we used. We managed to get from a local foam recycler's dumpster, so we were busy dipping into dumpsters when we needed parts. We never did see anything of the police, so we thought it was okay. Well, now Chuck, during our conversation when he was in rehabilitation, he said, in talking about his father, he said, yeah, my father, he made it into his 90s, and he was a robust man all the way to the end. And he was hoping that he would last that long too. But 87 is a good number. And it is my good fortune to consider him a good friend. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up any members of Janet's family who might like to share a remembrance. Thank you, Rachel.
I'm related to her, so I need the stool too. I'm Rachel. I'm Janet's niece. And I'm fortunate, the stories I have are the story I have is the story we shared. So I first met Chuck when Janet brought him to dinner at the house I share with my husband, Gary. And I don't know, maybe they'd been seeing each other 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and they had all these endearments for each other, sweetie and darling. And I was like, wow. So this was, I was so happy when Janet had moved up here after my uncle died. And this was a completely unexpected gift. Chuck made Janet so happy. I don't know if I've ever seen you as happy as that. And they were so enamored with each other, besotted. And I just remained really inspired and in awe, and it made me so deeply happy for both of them, for both you and Chuck, and for kind of a life and hope for all of us to find a new romance and fall deeply in love in your 80s. That is such a gift. Chuck came into our lives. We would have dinner together regularly, the four of us. Eventually he met my daughters, Jenna and Elena. And building our relationship was not always an easy road. We came together and, we hit bumps along the way. I'm deeply grateful that we had all of that time. There were times I think it was really hard for Chuck, and it was hard for me at times. And I'm really glad we had that time together, because by this spring, I'm really grateful that by this spring, when we had a family reunion in Texas, and again in the summer, probably a month and a half before he died, we celebrated Janet's birthday. We had a beautiful dinner overlooking the Sound, and it was a really special time together. My daughters were there from Seattle and across the country, and what I was amazed by was just how everybody, we were family, and we were family in the spring. And at first, Chuck was my family because he was Janet's family, and I'm glad we had the time for him to become part of our family, in a way, my family, right? And I guess what I want to say about all of that is that how inspired and impressed and touched I was by Chuck, who had lived 80 plus years and had been with people, had this life with lots of people in it that worked for him, and that we all changed how we, I'm going to lose my words, but we all changed to embrace each other. And to be able to do that after you've lived a certain way for 80 plus years, and it's worked for you just fine, and here are these people, this person, who it's not working with, the fact that he was willing to step back and adjust in his 80s, I'm grateful for it, and I hope, I'm not that far away from it, but I hope that I am still learning and meeting people where they are when I am that age. And I guess the only other thing is that was a wonderful thing you read, Janet, by him, and I regret that I didn't get to hear more from him. So I regret that the slice I have is the slice I have, but there was so much more, and if we'd had more time, I would have loved to deepen that relationship. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Rachel. please.
I didn't want to just follow my wife right up, but here I am. And I'm going to say what she said. The only real problem with Chuck is that he's not around anymore. And the best part of him is still around. And it's in you and it's in all of us. Thanks, everybody.
If there's anyone else who would like to share, please come forward. Thank you so much for your remembrances and your honoring of Chuck. And we want to thank Riley McLaughlin for these images from Chuck's life.
Thank you. I have a poem that I'd like to read that really expresses how I feel. It's called He Is Gone by David Harkins. You can shed tears that he is gone, or you can smile because he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see him, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him, and only that he is gone, or you can cherish his memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what he would want, smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. I want to thank you all for coming and sharing this afternoon with me and my family.
Our grief is a holy thing. It is proof that another life touched ours in a profound way. It's a mark of love, a mark of connection, and a mark of a life well lived. We'll extinguish our chalice with these words from poet William Blake. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. We give thanks for the generous and colorful and adventurous life of Chuck Ricketts. May his spirit know peace, and may healing come to the hearts of those who mourn him on this day. May we move into this evening with the wisdom that Chuck left us. Laugh and play often, create art, and love with your whole heart. Amen. For those on site, please feel free to gather at the columbarium outside, where we will commit Chuck's ashes. And for those online, thank you so much for your presence today.